The distress signal had been repeating for 17 hours. 3 simple words, looping in static-laced agony. Help me. Help me. Help me. No ship. No station. Just a lonely beacon drifting in the black, somewhere in the uncharted region of Gliese 1214. Commander Vance sat rigid in the pilot's seat of the Harbinger, watching the signal pulse like a dying heartbeat on the screen. Still no response, he asked. None, Reyes, the comms officer, muttered. It's on autoloop. No attached identification. No crew log. Just that? Could be a distress buoy, Dr. Carter suggested from the science deck, her fingers dancing over the bioscanners. Or a black box that got separated from a wreck. Vance's gut said otherwise. Something felt wrong about it. The Harbinger drifted closer, thrusters firing in small bursts as they approached the beacon. It was old, scorched by solar radiation, its metal plating warped from years, maybe decades, of drifting. But then, a shape emerged from behind it. A dark mass, almost indistinguishable from the void. Vance's breath hitched. What the hell is that? Something's attached to the beacon, Reyes whispered. Or it was the beacon? Dr. Carter adjusted the scanners, getting a faint organic reading. But it's not human. The thing moved. A sluggish, unnatural motion. Like it had just realized it was being watched. A deep, pulsing sound echoed through the comms. A vibration. A voice. Then the screen lit up with a new transmission. One word. Hello. The airlock hissed open, the sterilization field humming as the quarantine chamber depressurized. Vance stood with Reyes, Carter, and Security Chief Bishop as they stared into the containment cell. The thing was inside. It was big, maybe 7 feet tall when it moved, hunched and shifting like wet, black muscle stretched over an unfinished skeleton. Its skin glistened, semi-translucent, faintly reflecting the red emergency lights of the quarantine bay. And then it did something that made every muscle in Vance's body lock up. It spoke. Not through the comms. Not through a transmission. Its mouth moved. It formed words. I am human. A chill crawled up Vance's spine. Jesus Christ, Reyes whispered. The thing twitched, watching them with no eyes, its head tilting in an almost curious way. It spoke again, and this time, it mimicked Carter's voice perfectly. Help me. Help me. Help me. She took a shaky step back. No. No, 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 that's not possible. The thing shifted, its body glitching, skin rippling like a faulty hologram. And then, it changed. Its limbs snapped inward, torso contracting, its silhouette twisting like clay until it looked like her. Dr. Carter. Identical. Naked. Shivering. Perfect. She gasped, stumbling backward, hands clamping over her mouth. The thing, her twin, slowly stood up. It raised a shaking hand and spoke again. I am human. Then it smiled. And the alarms exploded. The quarantine bay was in lockdown. Red warning lights spun in harsh circles, casting eerie shadows over the thing inside the containment cell. Or rather, Dr. Carter's perfect copy. Vance barely registered the blaring alarms. His pulse hammered against his skull as he stared at the impossible creature mimicking his crew member. Every detail was exact, from the jagged scar along Carter's temple to the tiny ink stain on her left index finger. But there was something off. The eyes. They were too still, too calm, like a doll's, painted to look real, but void of life. Dr. Carter, the real one, was shaking, staring at her duplicate in horrified silence. And then the copy spoke again. I am Dr. Allison Carter. Its voice was flawless. It even matched Carter's usual tone, the clinical precision she used when discussing theories and research. Vance gritted his teeth. Bishop, reinforce the lockdown. Reyes, shut that alarm off. I want containment at maximum security. On it, Commander. The alarms died, but the red lights stayed, bathing the room in a sickly glow. Carter's copy tilted its head, blinking in perfect synchronization with the real Carter. It was studying her. No. It was learning her. Then, it took a step forward. The reinforced glass separating them groaned, warping slightly as the thing's presence distorted the air. Jesus Christ, Reyes muttered, taking a step back. It's like a goddamn mirror. The real Carter swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. Why is it pretending to be me? The duplicate grinned, an unnatural stretch of two perfect teeth, and said, Because I want to be. This is a mistake, Commander. Dr. Carter's voice was still shaking as she paced outside the quarantine bay. Vance stood with her, Reyes, and Bishop in the observation room, separated from the containment cell by reinforced steel walls and 2 layers of high-density glass. I know, Vance muttered. Then why the hell did we bring that thing on board? She snapped. This is first contact with a completely unknown species, and the first thing it does is wear my face? Vance exhaled. He didn't have a good answer. Only instincts. And right now, his gut told him that this thing, whatever it was, had a purpose. It wasn't random. It had called them here. It had spoken. It had learned. And now it was trying to be one of them. We can't just toss it back into space, Reyes said. Not after what we've seen. Bishop, ever the silent observer, leaned against the console, arms crossed. Then what's the plan? We let it keep playing house with Carter's face? Vance turned to the scientist. Is there any possibility that it's some kind of biological mimic? A defense mechanism? Carter hesitated. I don't know, she admitted. But nothing in our databases explains what this thing is. Vance sighed, rubbing his temples. Then we run tests. We figure out what it wants. If it's dangerous, we deal with it. Bishop let out a dry chuckle. Define deal with it? Vance didn't answer. Because deep down, he wasn't sure there was a way to deal with it. Not anymore. The Harbinger was a military-class vessel, equipped with some of the most advanced security systems in the fleet. None of that mattered. Because at 0200 hours the power flickered. It lasted only 5 seconds. But in that brief moment containment failed. The reinforced glass separating them from the mimic vanished. No alarms. No breach warning. Just nothing where something should have been. When Vance and his crew rushed to quarantine, the cell was empty. The mimic was gone. And Carter was missing. We are initiating a full ship lockdown. All crew must report to their designated security stations. This is not a drill. The ship-wide announcement crackled through the Harbinger's intercom as Vance, Reyes, and Bishop moved through the dark corridors. Weapons drawn. Flashlights cutting through the gloom. This doesn't make sense, Reyes muttered. Even if it got out, where the hell is Carter? They all knew the answer. But no one wanted to say it. The mimic hadn't just escaped. It had taken her. Or worse. It was her now. Vance's grip tightened around his sidearm. Stay sharp. It could be anywhere. Then a voice cut through the silence. Faint. Echoing down the hallway ahead. Commander Vance? Carter. Or her copy. The team froze. It was close. Too close. Then, movement. A silhouette stepped out from the shadows. It was Carter. Or, at least, it looked like her. She stood barefoot in the dim emergency lighting, her eyes too wide, her pupils unnaturally dilated. She smiled. I found something. Vance's heart pounded. He did not lower his weapon. Carter. His voice was careful. Controlled. What happened? Her smile didn't waver. I understand now. The hallway groaned around them. The metal walls warped, bending inward as if something bigger was pushing from the other side. Bishop took a step back. Commander, he muttered, that ain't Carter anymore. Vance knew he was right. But the thing wearing Carter's skin just tilted its head, watching them with an almost innocent expression. You don't have to be afraid, she whispered. And then, the ship screamed. Not the alarms. Not the crew. The Harbinger itself. The walls split. The lights shattered. A pulse of something massive surged through the corridors, rattling their bones, making the air taste like static and blood. And Carter laughed. Can't you feel it? She whispered. Vance's gun fired. The bullet hit her head-on, and did absolutely nothing. Her face rippled, her skin bending wrong, and then she changed again. Not into herself, not into the mimic they had found, but into something else entirely. Something with too many eyes, too many mouths, something that was no longer trying to be human. It had learned enough. It was done pretending. Vance felt the cold grip of true fear clamp around his chest. Because whatever this thing was, it had never been alone. And now it had finally called the rest of its kind. To finish the transformation. To become something new. To become them. The Harbinger was dying. The ship groaned like a wounded animal, its steel corridors bending and stretching as something unnatural seeped through its frame. The lights flickered erratically, casting jagged shadows that moved on their own. And Carter, if it could still be called that, stood in the center of it all, smiling. Vance had fired 3 more shots. Each bullet hit, but none mattered. Her body rippled, absorbing the kinetic force like liquid, before reforming into something eerily human again. Then she took a step forward. Vance stepped back. Behind him, Reyes and Bishop held their weapons ready, but no one fired. There was no point. It had stopped pretending to be just Carter. Now it was something else entirely. Bishop, Reyes, plan? Vance's voice was a low whisper over their comms. Bishop's reply was instant. Run. Reyes gritted her teeth. We can't just leave it here, Commander. You think we can fight that thing? Bishop shot back. It already survived being spaced once. What do you think happens if we let it finish whatever the hell it's doing? Vance had a sinking feeling he already knew. Because the ship wasn't just failing. It was changing. The metal walls shifted, pulsing in a slow, rhythmic way like breathing. Like flesh. And the whispers were back. Crawling beneath their skin. Filling the air. Join us. Let go. Be more. Reyes shuddered. We have to kill it. Vance agreed. But first they had to survive. They ran. Through the darkened corridors of the Harbinger, past flickering displays showing incomprehensible symbols, past doors that had melted into walls, past the echoing laughter of something that had Carter's voice but wasn't her anymore. Vance hit his comms. Engineering, report. Silence. Anyone in engineering, respond. A burst of static. Then, Commander. A gargling choke. Wet. Inhuman. And then, nothing. The comm line died. Reyes swore. We just lost the goddamn engine room. Vance's stomach twisted. Bishop, options. Shuttle bays still intact, Bishop panted. But if that thing controls the ship, it might be waiting for us there. Then we make sure it doesn't follow. They rounded a corner and froze. Because the hallway ahead was gone. No walls. No ceiling. No floor. Just void. A gaping tear in space, stretching out into infinity, and beyond it, something moved. Something big. Something that saw them. And smiled. Carter's voice slithered through the comms. You see it now, don't you? The air shook with her words, bending the metal walls as if they were paper. Vance's grip on his rifle tightened. What the hell did you do? A breath of laughter. I didn't do anything, Commander. I only opened the door. Reyes took an unsteady step back. She's not just a mimic. She's a goddamn key. And they had let her in. The corridor shuddered, and Carter, or what used to be Carter, stepped through the rippling air ahead. She was taller now. Her limbs longer, stretched impossibly thin, her fingers ending in points that curled like talons. Her skin rippled, shifting between dozens of faces, some human, some not. And her eyes were the void itself. You don't have to run, she whispered. It only hurts if you fight it. Then she lunged. Vance barely had time to react. The air split as Carter's form blurred, moving with impossible speed. Bishop fired first. His rifle unloading a full energy burst straight into her chest. For a single second, it worked. The blast ripped through her torso, sending her staggering back, but the wound didn't bleed. It just opened into a swirling black void and closed again. Like it was never there. She grinned. Then she tore Bishop apart. One moment, he was standing beside Vance. The next, he wasn't. His body folded inward, compressed into something horribly small, something that shouldn't exist. Then gone. Like he'd never been there at all. Reyes screamed. Vance shoved her back. Move! They ran. The shuttle bay was their only chance. They reached the final security door, Reyes slamming the override, but the ship was fighting them. The systems glitched, the locks flickering in and out of existence. Carter was close now. Vance could feel her. She was everywhere. The walls twisted with her presence. The shadows breathed in time with her words. And her voice was right in his ear. Why do you keep running? The door opened. Reyes grabbed Vance's arm, dragging him inside just as Carter's arm shot forward. A fraction of a second too late. The security door slammed shut, the reinforced metal sealing them inside the shuttle bay. For the briefest moment there was silence. Then, bang. The walls dented outward. Carter was outside, trying to get in. Reyes panted. How do we kill something that isn't real? Vance didn't answer. Because there was only one option left, and it was suicide. The Harbinger's fusion core was below them. A self-destruct sequence could wipe the entire ship from existence, including whatever Carter had become. But they had to escape first. Vance ran for the nearest shuttle, punching in launch protocols manually. The engines roared to life, and Carter screamed. The entire shuttle bay warped, her voice shaking the walls. You don't have to die, Commander. Her voice was everywhere. Just let me in. Reyes was already strapping in. Blow the ship. And this? Vance didn't hesitate. He punched the override and initiated self-destruct. The countdown began. 90 seconds. Carter tore through the walls. 60 seconds. Her arms stretched, reaching for them. 30 seconds. She almost made it inside. But Vance hit launch, and the shuttle blasted free. From orbit, the Harbinger was nothing but a silhouette against the stars. Until the fusion core detonated. A silent burst of impossible energy, a ripple through space, swallowing the ship whole. And Carter with it. Vance watched as the void collapsed, and for the first time, he felt something like relief. Then, beside him, Reyes let out a shaky breath, and whispered, Commander, I don't think we made it out alone. Vance turned, and froze, because Reyes was smiling. But her eyes were black. Vance's breath caught in his throat. Reyes was smiling. Not the relieved, adrenaline-fueled grin of someone who had just survived a nightmare. It was wrong. Too still. Too calculated. And her eyes. The moment he saw them, pure black, depthless, endless, he knew. Carter had made it aboard. The shuttle drifted in space, engines humming as the automatic stabilization kicked in. Through the viewport, Vance saw the last remnants of the Harbinger burning away into nothingness. The explosion had been absolute, and yet, she was still here. He reached slowly for the sidearm holstered at his hip. Reyes? His voice was calm, controlled. You okay? Her smile didn't change. Never better, Commander. Her voice was hers. Perfect. Undistorted. Too perfect. Vance had seen Reyes after missions. He'd seen her battered, shaken, scarred. But this? She was too still. Too aware. Like she was waiting. And then, she blinked. The blackness vanished. Her eyes were brown again, and she looked at him like nothing was wrong. What? She asked, frowning. Vance, you good? The gun was already in his hand. He aimed it at her head. Commander. Her voice shook now, her expression flickering between confusion and fear. She looked so human. Exactly like Reyes. But Vance had seen. He knew. You were compromised? His voice was steel. Carter's in you. Her frown deepened. Vance, it's me. That's exactly what Carter would say. Move, he ordered. Into the airlock. Her eyes widened. Wait, hold on. Now, Reyes. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, She lifted her hands slowly, stepping toward the shuttle's airlock. Each movement measured. Vance followed, gun trained on the back of her skull. She stepped inside, turned to face him, expression calm. Vance, listen to me. I can't take that risk. Then make sure, she said softly. And then, she lowered her weapon, held her arms out. Scan me. The shuttle's biosensors could detect abnormalities, genetic anomalies, foreign matter, signs of infection. Vance activated the scan. The system whirred, processing, analyzing, and then, no foreign contaminants detected. The words blinked across the screen. Vance's grip tightened on his gun. Because it didn't mean anything. Carter had been perfect. She had learned. She had adapted. Reyes saw the doubt in his face. And she broke. Vance, please, she whispered. I am not that thing. She looked so real. Her hands shaking. Her voice cracking. And for 1 second, he hesitated. 1 second too long. Because then, she moved. Faster than human. Vance fired. The bullet tore through her shoulder, sending her staggering back into the airlock wall. But she didn't fall. She just tilted her head. And smiled. Her wound sealed. Seamlessly. Almost had me, Commander. Then she lunged. Vance barely rolled away in time. She hit the opposite wall, fingers curling into metal, tearing through it like paper. And when she turned, her face was wrong. It was still Reyes, still human. But there was something underneath it. Something trying to break free. You almost made it out, she said. Almost. Vance kicked off the ground, bolting for the emergency override. He had one chance. If he could flush her into space, maybe. She moved again. Too fast. A blur of motion. Then pain. Her fingers slammed into his chest, gripping his ribs too tight, her nails elongating, piercing his flight suit. Vance roared, and fired point-blank into her stomach. She shuddered. Not in pain, but in something close to pleasure. Then she whispered in his ear. I just wanted to be human. Vance did the only thing he could. With his last ounce of strength, he reached past her, fingers slamming into the emergency airlock control, and pulled the release. The airlock screamed open. A deafening howl of pressure, pulling them both toward the void. Reyes, or what was inside her, snarled, her grip tightening as the vacuum ripped at them. But Vance had one hand free. And he had a knife. He drove it straight into her eye. The thing inside her shrieked, and let go. The vacuum claimed her, tore her from the ship, flinging her into the infinite dark. For one final second she looked at him, and smiled. Then she was gone. The airlock sealed automatically. Vance collapsed, chest heaving, body shaking. Alone. Truly alone. The emergency alarms blared, flashing red. But the ship was still functional. He was still alive. He didn't move for a long time. Then, he forced himself up, and set a course for home. 1 week later, Vance floated in darkness. The rescue team had found him drifting in deep space, oxygen nearly depleted, body battered but alive. The debrief had been relentless. He told them everything. But there was one thing he didn't say. Something only he knew. Because when he had stared into the void, watched Reyes get pulled into the abyss, he had seen something else. Something watching. Something waiting. And even now, as he sat in the sterile, white-walled infirmary, he could still hear her voice, still feel her presence, and in the mirror across the room. For just a second, his own eyes turned black, and he smiled.